And here's our first report.
Thousands of troops have moved to staging areas close to the university quarter, apparently poised to fulfill a martial law order to put the campuses under military control. But overall, the siege of Beijing is moving from the military to the political, the first wave of arrests.
It's very difficult in a totalitarian state to hide. There are a lot of instruments of authority available to the security forces.
Supreme Leader Deng Xiaoping, rumored dead a few days ago, reappeared for the first time in 3 weeks and took responsibility for the crackdown that resulted in the massacre of hundreds, if not thousands, of peaceful protesters. Communist authorities have called on the survivors to give themselves up to the police.
They will use photographs that have been taken during the course of the demonstrations, probably to include even those photographs that were used by the media services here in the United States.
Deng praised the brutal suppression of the students and led a silent tribute to soldiers who died during the night of military terror. Deng's appearance is the sign the Chinese public has been waiting for, that there is an intact power structure. Deng attempted to justify the violence by saying that the protesters were attempting to overthrow the communist system and turn China into a capitalist country. The United States and other countries evacuated more of their citizens today because of the potential for continued upheaval.
Good to get back. I'm too old to be doing this. Good to get back home.
Tomorrow, embassy officers who have been working around the clock plan to cross the military lines to rescue anxious Americans stranded in Tianjin, 150 miles away. There is no rescue for pro-democracy students now on the run from Chinese police. John Sheehan, CBS News, Beijing.
The heart of China was a garrison today. In Tiananmen Square, the authorities staged a pageant of victory, a coronation ceremony for the old guard, which had waged war against a new generation and had won. There was martial music and military precision, a smart and sharp contrast to the sweet disorder of the democracy movement, which had dominated the square until Saturday night. The rest of Beijing was coming back to life in a sullen sort of way. The rest of Beijing, that is, except for the campuses, which were desolate places. At Beijing University, the heart of the rebellion, dormitories were deserted, classrooms empty, sports fields abandoned.
Students say the Army swept through the campus for the first time last night and talked to the administration, wanted to know who belonged to the student union, which has been declared an illegal organization. The president of the university this morning told all the students to leave the campus and go home for their own safety.
In fact, the exodus had already begun. Students, by definition now marked men, trying to fade away into the vastness of China.
Most of the people think the Army's going to come any minute, take students away, maybe the professors away, people that were involved in the protest.
Some American exchange students came by to look for their Chinese friends, found a few, just a few.
Most of them have gone back home, back to their towns. They've just gotten on trains and gotten out of here. They were really scared, so for good reason.
The only life on campus was by the memorial boards, where lists were updated of the dead and the missing, where mourning was a residual act of rebellion, with the government still insisting that no students had died in the square. Meet blood with blood, read one poster. No one on earth has ever been so cruel, read another. There was lingering horror and disbelief.
I was very sad about that, and scared. Everyone has fears about that, so I'm not sure. No. I don't want it again.
There are no safe places anymore. All over China, faces in a crowd were spotted by soldiers and taken away. The roundup had begun. In Chengdu, Sichuan province, 100 people arrested, the authorities say, for vandalizing vehicles. Young people. In the industrial city of Wuhan, more young people, a gang of hooligans, according to the authorities. Everywhere tonight, it seems that the best and the brightest are behind bars or on the run. By Beijing Science University, a banner reads, "The mountains are crying for the loss of our youth. It is a generation with hate in its heart, which will surface again one day. But for now, for this month of June, this is the class of '89. Bob Simon, CBS News, Beijing.
There are some signs that the center of gravity for the pro-democracy movement may be shifting to Shanghai, China's largest city. There was another huge protest march there today. For reasons that are unclear, Communist Party leaders did not or could not stop it. Shanghai demonstrators, led by students, are making stiff demands. How long they will be allowed to make them unchallenged is a question mark. Jerry Bowen is our man in Shanghai.
In Beijing, students have been killed for this. In the port city of Shanghai today, where there's no martial law, city officials let them march, let them publicly mourn the dead of Tiananmen Square, the students killed in the massacre that Beijing now insists never took place. Tens of thousands of students and some workers began their protest in Shanghai's People's Square, marched in with banners and flags and wreaths, the largest anti-government demonstration in China since the carnage in Beijing. But it's a march to the beat of a tired drummer. The students have ended their street barricades here. Some of their leaders have been arrested. Worker support has weakened, and there's desperation mixed with the defiance as the students speak of their hopes for democracy, their hopes for freedom.
We are sure that we will win a final victory, although it may mean that we will have to fight for some long time and we may lose some more lives.
Today, it was government surveillance of the people as the students made new demands, called for a dialogue, for Shanghai television to show the killing that took place in Beijing, for city flags to be lowered to half-staff to honor the dead.
The students have given the Shanghai government 48 hours to respond to their demands, or else. The or else was left vague, but one can only imagine the reaction of a government used to delivering its own ultimatums.
Shanghai's mayor said only last night he doesn't want to call on the army, doesn't want martial law. What he may have been saying was, learn from the lesson of Tiananmen Square. So the police today just stood by and watched as the students marched into the heart of Shanghai, on by City Hall, toward a self-imposed deadline, perhaps toward a new confrontation. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Shanghai.
President Bush, through spokesman, today condemned the Beijing massacre. But the president is sticking with the policy of trying not to be what he considers too critical of China's communist leadership. More about that from White House correspondent Leslie Stahl. Leslie?
Dan, the president's press secretary was harsher in his denunciations today than the president was last night. Said the press secretary, the government has murdered many of its own people. Reprisals against the students are repugnant. We watch this with grave concern. And yet, despite the TV pictures today of Deng Xiaoping in effect taking credit for the crackdown, Mr. Bush still won't make judgments about Deng and is still waiting for him to return the phone call Mr. Bush placed to him yesterday. It's been hard for those involved in the plotting, step-by-step, 17-year climb to a good relationship to see it disintegrate so rapidly. Going back to Richard Nixon's breakthrough meeting with Mao Zedong, every president has kept the momentum going.
The progress has been fantastic from 72 up until several weeks ago. I am saddened to see this rupture take place, and I hope it's temporary.
So does President Bush, who was envoy to China in the Ford years. He celebrated the stability of the relationship with a walk through Tiananmen Square 3 months before the massacre there.
What I want to do is preserve this relationship as best I can, and I hope the conditions that lie ahead will permit me to preserve this relationship.
This is an enormous setback for Sino-American relations.
Many of the old China hands question whether the relationship can be preserved.
This entire fabric of bilateral relations has clearly been jeopardized, perhaps even damaged very seriously by the events of the last few weeks.
Officials here say that neither trade sanctions nor economic reprisals can have any effect in the short term on Chinese behavior, so Mr. Bush sees no point in moving fast. He also believes that any split with China can only benefit the Soviet Union. Dan?
Leslie Stahl, thanks. There was a big rally supporting China's freedom movement at the United Nations today. New York's Democratic Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan urged support for President Bush's policy, the policy of not being too critical of Chinese communist leaders. Moynihan was booed off the stage. CBS News reporter Aaron Hayes has more on the demonstrations here in New York and other U.S. cities.
All live democracy!
Nearly 20,000 Chinese Americans marched in a downpour through the streets of New York's Chinatown, denouncing Li Peng and Deng Xiaoping as murderers.
Stop the killing! Stop the killing!
At the United Nations, New York's Mayor Koch said President Bush should give asylum to Chinese student leaders in Beijing and make a personal appearance before the UN Security Council.
And he should turn to the ambassador of the People's Republic and he should say, shame! Shame! Shame!
This wasn't happening just in New York. Chinese Americans demonstrated in solidarity with their countrymen in cities throughout the U.S. today. In Los Angeles, hundreds protested at UCLA. In Chicago, as church bells tolled, demonstrators wept.
There were so many times I wish I were blind so that I didn't have to see the blood of Chinese people dripping off the pages of newspapers.
Last Saturday, the symbol of the student protest was crushed in Beijing. But late today, a new goddess of democracy was brought to the Chinese consulate in New York. Its student sculptors hope the goddess will one day stand in victory in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Aaron Hayes, CBS News, New York.
And still to come on the CBS Evening News. Bruce Hall on keeping the kids in school by taking them out of the driver's seat. And Ray Brady on tomorrow's big race, the run for glory and serious money. Under Ronald Reagan appeared before a congressional panel today. Subject, big consulting fees he and other former Reagan appointees made off federal housing and urban development projects. CBS News reporter Ron Ellen covered today's heated exchanges over whether all that was legal, whether it was ethical.
Raise your right hand.
Former Interior Secretary James Watt met a storm of indignation from a congressional subcommittee investigating his role in a federal housing program mired in scandal.
I am saying to you that this is a smelly system in which you were a participant.
Watt earned $420,000 after leaving the Reagan administration, helping developers get grants to rehabilitate low-income housing.
I am proud to have been involved in bringing homes to people.
Although Watt has no housing expertise, the developer of this Maryland housing project hired him because, as she put it, Watt could get his phone calls returned and I could not. Watt says he met with former HUD Secretary Samuel Pierce once and made a few phone calls to other HUD officials. The developer got the project, Watt's fee, $300,000. Several congressmen call that influence peddling.
Where your influence with Secretary Pierce rather than your expertise led to one project rather than another being picked out at a fairly high amount.
My participation was legal, moral, ethical, and effective.
Subcommittee members were enraged that Watt, who once called government programs for the poor crumbs, was now portraying himself as a devout housing advocate.
Was it moral what you did?
Absolutely.
Why? Why is getting $300,000 to help build a project that someone else might have built moral? Now, come on.
Watt says that's the only way to get anything done with HUD.
I'm not here to defend the system. So I'm not a party. The system is flawed.
Watt is one of more than a dozen former Reagan appointees involved in the scandal. Investigators say all of this could cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. Ron Allen, CBS News, Washington.
The Labor Department reported today a big jump in wholesale prices last month, up 0.9%. That's about twice what most experts had expected, and it pushed wholesale inflation to an annual rate of 9.4%. Nearly 3 times what it was at this time last year. A steep rise in food prices was largely blamed. New stress, new disorder, and ethnic violence inside the Soviet Union. This time, Uzbekistan in Soviet Central Asia. At least 80 reported dead, 800 injured in this week's violence, not including some of the latest and most intense yet. CBS News Moscow correspondent Barry Peterson reports on the killing, the casualties, and growing challenge to Soviet central control.
The Soviets admitted tonight that they have lost control of the streets and parts of Uzbekistan. Soviet television showed burning houses from today's rioting, mobs on the street that the reporter said the militia are not strong enough to contain. Paratroopers are being flown in to help 9,000 riot-equipped troops battling the mobs and losing. Wounded are being evacuated from the area, and officials say there is no way to know how many have been killed until they can examine the rubble from days of violence that is now getting worse. A Soviet general said 100 people were hurt from automatic gunfire in the most recent incident when 5,000 stormed the center of an Uzbekistan town. And most ominous, what started as ethnic unrest, Turks against Uzbeks in a battle between rival Muslim sects, has now become a revolt against Soviet power. Police stations have been shot up. Turks by the thousands are fleeing the area, many being moved to hastily built refugee camps. Uzbeks are hanging red flags on their houses to tell the mobs, "We're not Turks, don't burn our houses." The rioting is forcing Mikhail Gorbachev to trim events from his critical summit next week in West Germany so he can stay in closer touch with the trouble. Aides are denying reports that he may be forced to cancel the trip altogether to deal with this growing fire in his own backyard. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Moscow.
Gunmen in El Salvador today assassinated a key cabinet minister in the new government of President Alfredo Cristiani. The killers gunned down Chief of Staff Jose Antonio Rodriguez Porth as he left home for work. His driver and bodyguard also were killed. Porth was President Cristiani's closest advisors. Officials blamed rebels and vowed to fight fire with fire.
I've never seen her so happy.
Really? How do you measure success? For the Parkers, it was the day their youngest child went off to college. A day that began 12 years ago when a Dean Witter broker took a little extra time to convince them to set up a college fund. There are many ways to measure success. Dean Witter measures it, one investor at a time. Dean Witter, a member of the Sears Financial Network.
100 years ago, before America's landfills were overflowing, these words were written. The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. In the web of life, man is merely a strand. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. This thought is brought to you by Alcoa as a reminder to recycle your aluminum beverage cans. Already, half the aluminum cans come back for recycling. What about yours?
Just this much Court-Aid heals more kinds of itches and rashes than all of these. Because Court-Aid has a clinically proven healing medicine they don't have. That's why Court-Aid is the Itch-Aid.
This is a phone. This is a finger. This is how easy it is for anyone to get 100% fiber.
In Virginia, a number of other states across the country may adopt it. It's a law that you might say is driving dropouts back to high school. Bruce Hall reports about it.
Teresa Lynn Lafferty.
West Virginia high schools are graduating record numbers of students. The reason? A tough new law suspending the driver's licenses of dropouts. That's not only reduced the dropout rate, but has brought 1,800 kids back to school.
I think it's kept a lot of kids in school. I think it's a good law.
Did it keep you in school?
Yes, sir, it did. It sure did.
I thought about quitting school, and then that rule came out, and it changed my mind a whole lot.
They don't want their license taken away. Students really enjoy the privilege of driving a car. For the fellas, it's a status symbol. They need to have those wheels.
The idea is catching on around the country. State lawmakers like it because it is popular with the voters. And best of all, it costs virtually nothing to implement. More than a dozen states are considering similar laws. Nationwide, nearly 1 million kids drop out every year. 1 of every 4 students entering high school fails to make it to graduation.
The students that do not graduate are not likely to find a job, and they may end up on the social welfare rolls or even perhaps in our prisons.
The law faces its first legal challenge from 17-year-old Michael Means, who lost his license when he dropped out to support his wife and the child they expect this summer.
Without my license, I can't get a job.
It's got us in a bind. I mean, we have to call people every time we need to go somewhere.
Mike has a clean record. He deserves his license. He deserves to work. He deserves to support his family and not become a burden on the state.
Constitutional attorneys say the law may face trouble in court. The West Virginia educators are pleased, saying the dropout rate has been cut by 1/3 in only 1 year. Dangling car keys in front of students is becoming the most successful way to keep kids in school. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Charleston, West Virginia.
Powerful new tornadoes hit the Florida Panhandle last night. 3 members of one family were killed in the fishing village of East Point, Florida. At least 19 houses were destroyed. On the heels of the tornadoes, heavy rainfall moved in, more than 15 inches in one Florida place in 24 hours. Well, it rained all day today on New York's Belmont racetrack. That may mean sloppy going for tomorrow's Belmont Stakes, the final jewel in racing's famous Triple Crown. And that, in turn, may favor the horse already an even money favorite, Sunday Silence. Ray Brady was out early at the track today to look at this 3-year-old whose legs may be made of gold.
Coming out of this morning's mist, it's Sunday Silence, possibly on his way to becoming the first horse since 1978 to win racing's Triple Crown. Though today he almost flattened Charlie Whittingham, his 76-year-old trainer and co-owner.
Go ahead. Go on. He's a fighter all the way. He reared up and belted me alongside the head this morning.
Coming to the finish of the Derby, Sunday Silence. Sunday Silence first won the Kentucky Derby.
Sunday Silence and Easy Goer. Photo finish.
Then the Preakness by a nose over Easy Goer. Winning tomorrow's Belmont would give him the Triple Crown and a total of $5 million in prize money. Along with prize money, Sunday Silence will probably earn about $15 million in stud fees, helping to breed other horses. And if he wins tomorrow, those fees could go as high as $30 million. Those millions of dollars would make anybody nervous. The famous war admiral got only $135,000 for winning the Triple Crown in 1937. Even the great Secretariat, winning as recently as 1973, got just $375,000.
I can remember in the early 80s race in Chicago, and they got talking about $1 million race, and I thought they were all crazy.
But horses were ducking out of the Triple Crown for bigger prizes elsewhere. So much of that $5 million prize came from the Chrysler Corporation. The tracks get the crowds. Chrysler gets the promotion.
I hope they don't let it get to where it's too much. I'd hate to see it be, say a Chrysler Kentucky Derby or a Chrysler Belmont.
Bigger purses attract better fields and more horses and more competitive racing.
So Sunday Silence is getting ready to gallop for glory and greenbacks. Lots and lots of greenbacks. Ray Brady, CBS News, New York.
And that's the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. We will, of course, report any major developments in China tonight and throughout the weekend. Bob Shifu will bring you the news tomorrow. Connie Chung will be here Sunday. I'll see you Monday. Good night.
This is CBS.